Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Arianism was successful. Arianism is named after Arius. Arius was the leader of a local Christian congregation in northern Africa, and basically what he was trying to say was that Jesus was the Son begotten by God and not co-eternal with God the Father. Jesus was thus a human whose father was God in the point of view of Arius and later on everybody who supported Arianism. Trinity was rejected and Jesus was not seen as part of God. He was therefore subordinate to God. This doctrine started to gain popularity around the 4th century, but there were always some discussions around this topic of the Trinity, whether Jesus was part of God or not. So we cannot exclude the fact that there were maybe already other doctrines before that just never gained popularity or were suppressed. Two Roman emperors were Arians, as were most of the Germanic or barbarian kingdoms. Arianism was therefore very popular and could have indeed gained more traction. Unfortunately for Arius and the followers of Arianism, there was the First Council of Nicaea, which sought to clarify certain points of Christianity. Christianity is still nowadays very divided, and you have different factions, you have different ways of thinking, different interpretations. And actually, and this is now something very surprising, in the antiquity, you had also versions of Christianity that were not really monotheistic. Some interpretations saw the mother of Jesus even as a goddess. Some interpretations saw the devil or Satan on par with God as an anti-God, and so on. This was a messy situation, and Constantine wanted to have some order. The last thing that he wanted was to have again more destabilization, and this was something that he could fix. That's why the Council of Nicaea was created in the first place, to create more stability. Let me tell you a fun fact. St. Nicholas, or Santa Claus for our dear American audience, participated in that council as well, and he slapped Arius in his face. Believe it or not, he got a prison sentence for it, so yes, Santa Claus was a bad guy and he was for some time in prison. Arianism was declared a heresy and was dead from that point on. The last powers that remained Arian were the Gothic kingdoms until around 500-600, it's not that clear. Also, the term Arianism is a bit vague, but can be used to describe Christians who believe in the following points. God created Jesus, also referred to as Logos, through his own will and not through his own essence. God and Jesus are not the same essence. God is only the true God and Logos isn't the true God. The Son is a unique creature of the Father. God became Father once he created Jesus. That there was a time where God wasn't a father. And the most important part, which I already mentioned way before, that Jesus is subordinate to God. So what if all of that changed? What if Arianism was successful? Let's take a specific point of divergence. Let's assume that Constantine had people around him who were Arians, and as a result the Council of Nicaea would not condemn Arianism as a heresy, because Constantine would fear that this might cause too much destabilization. Athanasius, an influential priest during the council, was exiled several times by the emperor, and perhaps his exile could be longer or even permanent. This would again be another aspect which could then be in favor for Arianism. It would open up some influence from advisors that Constantine had, which may have been Arian or semi-Arian, because the main Christian advisors, they were Arian or semi-Arian. Several emperors after Constantine, they were also following this interpretation of Christianity. So we can say that there is some chance for Arianism to not only survive, but to gain the upper hand and then thrive. Arianism wouldn't survive in its pure form, that's true, because after some time everything would change. However, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what would happen in the Council of Nicaea? Instead of denouncing Arianism, other things would gain the attention, as they did in OTL anyway. So not that much would change after all, except that Arianism would be left in the state of the unknown. It wouldn't be that clear whether Arianism was now the main doctrine, the main interpretation, or what was it. And in the early years of Christianity, this was actually something very normal. You had everywhere some different type of interpretation depending on the priest who was preaching. Additionally, many emperors after Constantine were, as I said, semi-Arian, and because of that, Barbarian and Germanic kingdoms converted to Arianism because they wanted to stay politically close to the Romans. Most of this is what happened in OTL, but this time around without the denunciation of Arianism. One emperor may actually clarify this, and we will get support for Arianism or the support of non-Trinitarianism. Trinitarianism, or anything close to it, will become a heresy instead. After clarifying that, another thing might happen, would be the discussion of Mary, and we might see something similar as the split of Nestorianism from the main branch or correct branch of Christianity happening, at least when it comes to the East. Imagery may also be far less popular, because not only would Jesus now have a different status, but the debates would, as I said, also include Mary, and we may never really get the typical images of Mary with baby Jesus. The cross or the fishes would be important, yes. Some imagery would always exist because religion inspires it. But the message that Jesus had about God, this would become more the imagery and not so much his deeds anymore. And also the saints and many other people, they may still get some imagery, but it wouldn't become that important. And this will butterfly away or weaken iconoclasm later on, which will be a very good thing for Byzantium. The West so far would only care for the religious interpretation as far as politics is concerned, and only to a specific point, of course. Now, the local population would perhaps still follow Trinitarianism instead of Arianism, but this would probably also change over time due to the fact that the average person had no time for debates. There were other more urgent things to do. You know, people had a life, they had to work, they had families, so they wouldn't just think about religious debates all the time. And due to the fact that the clergy would at one point follow the decisions that happened after the councils of Nicaea, it would also be in favor for a spread or acceptance of Arianism. With that said, one could still argue that if there were no more massive butterflies involved, something like the Frankish Empire would still arise, but this time around, the coronation of Charlemagne, or a similar figure, would not be done by the Pope. The Pope would just be one of many bishops, and the churches around Western Europe, they would also already have had their own councils, just like the Visigoths did, for instance. And we would see a system that would be more similar to Anglicanism. Christianity will officially be still very much united, but over time, every single kingdom or duchy or princedom or empire, whatever you want to call it, would do their own thing. A positive aspect for Byzantium is that without iconoclasm, as I said, it may be very strong and it could even extend its survival or even completely survive. Of course, in a much weaker form. We are not talking about the restoration of the Roman Empire. Let's be very clear about that. Western Europe would have a very, very different story. Without a true empire, there would not be a Holy Roman Empire, but we would rather get a very decentralized German kingdom, which could have a similar structure as the Kievan Rus, for instance, with very independent rulers, even republics in it. But it would over time collapse and then re-emerge again, while France would also follow a similar trajectory, but probably be much closer to OTL. And in Italy, we could have more wars because there wouldn't be this protective hand of the Holy Roman Empire in northern Italy. Islam could also change, but at this point, I think it would still remain fairly similar to OTL. I don't really know how Arianism and Islam would interact with each other. There are also like these theories that say that in Bosnia, for instance, Bogumilis, which for some other theorists is again some aspect of Arianism, they converted to Islam. But you know, this is very speculative, so I cannot make a clear point about it. However, after some time, Byzantium wouldn't be that weak as in OTL. This means that the Crusades may also even be butterflied away because of the absence of the Pope, who would just be a bishop of many. Pagan territories, however, they would experience more pressure than in OTL, and we could see Germans, Poles or Russians rampaging the Baltics or Scandinavia, for instance. The French, they would do the same in Iberia and quote-unquote help the Iberians with the Reconquista, which could even be accomplished much earlier on, and perhaps it could even extend to territories of Morocco or Algeria. As for the Middle East, we could find ourselves in a situation where some support from Christian kingdoms around Europe would be given to help Byzantium win back certain territories, but only because Jerusalem would still be very important to all of them. And we would not get an independent initiative which would then result into massive crusades over there. It would rather be like an alliance and then troops under the same command of Byzantium, and also because there isn't this split between Catholicism and Orthodoxy anymore, it could perhaps even make things a bit better. However, let's be very clear that there would still be some type of split, only that it would be very different. The church would also have a lot of influence, because even if it would be an Arianist or Arian church, they would still be a center of learning. However, arts, they would be less supported because there would be less imagery, but the church would support literature much more. Moreover, with the unofficial split of Christian churches, we would have more freedom of speech, in the sense that if a monk, a priest or bishop had an interpretation that was unacceptable in one kingdom, he could just go to another kingdom and spread his opinion in there. This could also be a political tool. If, let's say, two kingdoms, they were at odds with each other, for instance, they could just use that to gain power or leverage. As a result, the odds for a more literate population in Europe is very high, while the arts, they would be lagging behind for some decades or even centuries, unfortunately. After some more decades or centuries, we would find ourselves in a situation where the church would not be a united institution, but have more similarities with Islam or Buddhism. We could even have a situation where there would be different schools of Christianity which could coexist, or that the different orders, they would have a much stronger influence. than in our timeline. But they would all be under the authority of a royal figure or supreme leader. Churches would also never get this negative stigma, unlike in OGL, especially during the French Revolution, and Western Europe would be a little bit less united as well. The Church, especially Catholic Church, was an important factor and had the advantage of being a united institution. In this alternate timeline, however, this would not be the case. The power of the churches, they would be way smaller, and thus the church may even sometimes be some type of spokesperson for the common folks. We could even stretch it so far and say that the churches of each kingdom may become the place, thanks to the bigger freedom of speech and higher intellectual tradition, that would advocate for social changes within the kingdoms. And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.